feel like it's been a little while since I made a proper steel knife, and I think that's what we're going to be doing today. But it's not just going to be a traditional stock removal knife, it's going to be stock removal from this piece of bar stock. Now this was sent to me by another knife maker who's got some great YouTube channels out there. His name is Kyle Royer. He is a master smith and he is amazingly talented both at knife making and at making the metal to make the knives out of. So this is a very fancy piece of Damascus steel that he made and sent to me. And the patterning on this thing is just unreal. So hopefully I will be able to turn this into a knife worthy of this piece of steel. It's a tall order. I wanted to pick a knife design that would really highlight the blade. So I wanted something that used as much metal as possible. I didn't want to waste a lot, and I wanted something that was a pretty wide and flat surface. So I decided a chef's knife would be a good choice for that. Obviously I can't do anything too wide. This is my bar stock. I don't have any forging tools to flatten this out, and even if I did, I would be worried about ruining the pattern. So this is the approximate blade design that I've come up with. This whole blade, including the tang, fits on this bar. It's close, but it fits. And I think we have just a really good amount of like flat, smooth surface. I'm gonna try and do just one grind all the way from one side to the other, so nothing is really interrupting the pattern of the metal because, as I said, that's what we want to highlight the most. I've also tried to make the knife design one where it tapers basically to the center so that the center of this design will go up the whole blade and keep going to the point and not have the blade go up off the side. So we now have to cut this shape out of this bar of steel. Although at this point, we may want to thin this down before we do that, just because there's a lot of metal in here and a chef's knife does not need to be that thick. In fact, that'd be a really intense chef knife. All right, so this is a mark for where I want to use the surface grinder. You know, experimenting, doing something brand new that you've never done before with a very fancy and probably expensive piece of steel. What a good time to experiment and try new things that may or may not work. I was about to start grinding, but then I realized I should really have a way to make sure that I'm grinding the same amount from both sides other than just looking at it with my eyes. So I am going to put marking fluid on the back edge of the metal, and I'm going to use tools to mark an equal distance from both sides, and that's how much I'm going to try to go in. I think that's going to do a much better job of marking evenly than just looking at it. All right, so I want to explain a little bit with a diagram what it is I'm working on in case it's not been clear, which makes a lot of sense. So imagine this section of the metal, that's what I've drawn here on the whiteboard. Just the edge from, between my two fingertips. That's about what we're looking at. So I've drawn it larger, and all of this has just been ground away, so it is gone. What we're left with is this nice taper. This looks okay maybe on a whiteboard, but it's actually very shallow on the metal. So what we want to do is change this up just a little bit. So instead of this gentle curve, we want it to come back a little farther and have a much more aggressive curve. So we want that on both sides. Well, that was high quality drawing right there, but much more aggressive curve. There we go. All right, I was thinking about the order of operations a little bit, how I want everything to fit together when I'm finished, and it's not yet time to add on that extra radius. We're gonna do that after we've put in the primary grind for the blade. Otherwise, we'd have to go back in and clean it up a ton later. So that's gonna happen after we do a lot of things, including heat treating. So we have to finish cutting the shape out of this knife. So I've got my blank, and I am going to take this part and just bring it back a little bit more so we've got space for the cool transition point we're building. And I'm just going to trace it out onto our block of steel, cut it out with the angle grinder. I'm familiar with using an angle grinder, and it always throws sparks, but most knives I make are stainless steel, which sparks, but not nearly as much as this. This is a carbon steel, a high carbon steel, knife steels. Actually, it's a couple different ones mixed together. That's how you make the Damascus pattern, but they're both high carbon, And high carbon sparks so much more than stainless. Like, I can see it visually, there's a lot more, I can feel it, there's way more heat coming off of it. I was like moving out of the way because I was pretty sure it was gonna light my shirt on fire if I didn't. It's just so much sparking, it's crazy. Right, basic shape is ground in. I'm definitely liking how it's looking. Before I do the heat treatment, a little bit more I want to do, especially I want to get this shoulder all nice and cleaned up. That's going to be something I do with putting on a file guide. That's some really hard, some tungsten carbide plates that I can't file through. Those will make a line, and I can line that up just right and grind right up against those plates because they're too hard for me to grind. But I want to make sure I do all of that shaping of this area before I heat treat it, because after heat treating it, using the hand files doesn't work very well on hardened steel. This is the file guide. These plates right here on the top that are slightly darker color are made of carbide, tungsten carbide. My files can't scratch through these, and even the sandpaper on the sanding belts won't scratch through these. You basically need to use diamonds to start scratching into these. So I can put this against the belt grinder, I can just press right up against the belt, and it won't go any farther down than these carbide plates. So it lets me get a nice square fit up, which I'll then touch up with files, and should be nice and clean that way. This is looking really good. I'm very happy with what we've got here, and I believe our next step is gonna be moving on to the heat treatment. So, look at that, look at that, look at that, it's knife shaped. Ha ha ha! Practice my stabbing. So with the knife blank ready, we've now turned the kiln on, heated it up to temperature. We're gonna put the knife into the kiln. That's going to lower the temperature a little bit, opening the door and the amount of heat that the metal is going to suck in. We're going to wait for it to get back up to temperature, which is 1,525 Fahrenheit, and then we're going to let it sit there for 5 to 10 minutes. While it's doing that, we've got our quench oil, and we're going to slowly warm that up using a blowtorch on the outside of the container, and that way the oil temperature will be about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which will get the oil to the viscosity that we need for the proper heat treatment. Once it's been in the kiln for 5 to 10 minutes, I'll take it out with these pliers, which I've already set to the right size to get a good grip on the handle. Take it out, plunge it down into the oil, move it up and down in there for a couple minutes to get it down. And by that point, hopefully it will be hard, and very hopefully it won't have warped much, because if it warps a lot, about all I can do is try and fix it in the temper. Okay, that's probably gonna take 15-ish minutes to get back up to temperature, and then we have to give it about 5 minutes once it hits temperature. So we've probably got around 20 before we pull that out. The knife should be ready. Time for it to go into oil as soon as I throw some safety glasses on in case the oil splashes anywhere. Good news is it is looking very straight. Yeah. All right, that has come out looking very nice so far. It is still theoretically possible that it will warp, but at this point I think we're probably good. A lovely amount of scale on the outside of that. There we go. So this part that I was holding onto with the tongs didn't go into the oil nearly as quickly, and the file kind of bites into it. Like, even with a light pass, it just kind of grabs it. Over here on the spine, it just kind of glides right off. It's a very good sign this has been hardened. We'll do a proper hardness test. Now, what we have to do is temper it. We'll wait for it to cool down to about room temperature, and while that's cooling down, our oven will cool down. We're then going to put this into the oven at about 385 for 2 hours, and that will help make it softer, because right now it's very hard, but it's very brittle. You could likely hit it on something hard and it would just break. We don't want that. When the knife is cooled down, it's time to temper it in the oven, but first I want to do a hardness test and see where it is. Okay, yeah, 62. Our machine probably runs about half of one loaf, so this is probably 62 and a half or something like that, which is very hard. The heat treatment went very well so far. All right, the knife has been heat treated. After getting it hot and quenching it, we then did the tempering cycles. Actually, I ended up doing 3 because while it's tempering is a time that you can try and fix warps. If you counter bend the knife just a little bit while heating it up to the tempering heat, sometimes you'll get a change in it. And I had a slight warp in the tang, and then after the first 2 heat treatments, I had the tip was just angled off a little bit. So I did a third one where I tried to fix some of that warpage, and I think it did a pretty good job. So we are very close to straight. I think we'll start by throwing it back in the surface grinder, taking off a lot of this scale and making sure that the blade really is straight and true. Then we can take some measurements of where the middle is and start grinding down to actually put in the bevels on our blade. After doing all of the heat treating and tempering all 3 cycles of it, I did do another test on our hardness tester, and this thing still came out at an HRC 59, so this is going to be a very good, hard, probably quite tough blade. So this is fun. My 2 lines are pretty nice and parallel. Down the length of the blade, looking good. Getting to right here, it's maybe a little closer to one side than the other. And then I get into this thicker area that I'm hoping to turn into a sort of bolster transition point. And the lines sort of skive off in one direction a little bit, meaning this thicker spot is not quite in line with the rest of the blade. I am just going to grind to the lines, and that's going to change some of the shape of this, and that's all right. At this point, the knife has had as much grinding on the grinder as I feel like I can safely do without ruining it. So it's time to move on to hand sanding, and I'm going to be trying to smooth it out really nice and flat and pretty, taking away all of the sharp corners. So there's some edges that I want to make sure aren't there. I want to make sure the spine is really nice and rounded and smooth, and that's going to take a while because hand sanding takes forever. I have here a very lovely setup, by which I mean this is very weird. Because I've got the sort of integral swell in the middle, I can't lay the knife flat onto my sanding plane like I normally would, or at least I can't clamp it there very well. So I've got a lot of popsicle sticks stacked up underneath it to try and give it some support and keep it nice and flat. We're gonna learn if that actually works in just a minute. The hand sanding should now be complete, at least the stuff that I needed to do up to this part of the process. And the next part of the process is the acid etch. So because this is actually a piece of Damascus steel, it has amazingly cool layers of 2 different kinds of steel running through it. One of those types of metal will react with ferric chloride and turn a very dark color. It's going to turn almost black. The other type has, I believe, more nickel in it, and it does not react the same way and should stay silvery shiny. So properly done, this acid etching should bring out the pattern that was forged into it and look just so freaking cool. So we're gonna do that, and the first step is to thoroughly wash the blade so I don't have any of my oily fingerprints all over it. All right, with our solution mixed up, it's time to put the knife into the solution for about 5 minutes. I have never done the ferric chloride to Damascus before, so I don't know how much it's going to start revealing it in the first pass. Got it sitting up with the, it's laying on the edge. There's going to be multiple passes, and on subsequent passes I'll alternate. So next time I'll do blade down, spine up. It's probably not contacting in very many points on the spine right now anyway, but just to make sure it gets everywhere, we'll switch around. There's our timer for 5 minutes. Time to rinse this. Oh, and it is already bringing that pattern out and looking good. This pitcher has water with baking soda in it to neutralize any excess ferric chloride that's still on the blade. And it's not fizzing, which means I probably rinsed at least almost all of it off. After we take it out of the final etch, we're going to be rinsing it off and putting it into a different chemical, which is instant coffee. So I've prepared, it's about 8 cups of instant coffee, and this concentration, from what I understand, is 10 times stronger than anything people would normally drink, including like espresso or anything like that. The coffee, which is also acidic and extremely potently dark, it should help stabilize the etching and darken it a little bit, and maybe even etch just a little bit more into the metal. So I've got this tray set up with wires to hold the knife off the bottom with minimal contact, and we're gonna pour the coffee into here, and then the knife will go in that tray, and it's gonna stay in there for 4 hours. And I have never tested pouring with this pot before, so I'm just really hoping it's gonna work and not dump coffee all over my studio. Oh good, it pours nicely. I might turn it over halfway through. It shouldn't matter. There's so little contact anywhere, but just in case. When I took the knife out of the coffee, it had quite a bit more black staining on it than I was hoping it would. Something about what I've done has made it so that the parts that are supposed to be silvery have ended up getting etched black. And I talked to Kyle Royer about what could be causing this, and it seems that my ferric chloride mixture is working way faster and more intensely than it would normally be expected to. So I did another buffing. I did like a 3000 grit sandpaper, took it back to cleaner, and then I put it back in I actually diluted the ferric chloride a little bit more. I put it back in for only a little bit of time, like 20 seconds, and it still got fairly dark. So very carefully I did a light sandpapering of the surface while it was under running water to try and just take the oxide off of the part that's supposed to be shiny. That seemed to work okay, and then I put it back into the coffee for another 4 hours, and now I've taken it out and it is drying and hardening, and it seems to have worked great. I really like the look. We've definitely got a good contrast between the spots that are supposed to be black and the parts that are supposed to be silvery, which currently are sort of like coffee stained silvery. The idea is that after I've let it dry overnight, I'll be able to take a polishing cloth and get rid of the coffee stain on the silvery part, but the staining on the darker part should stay there. So it took some doing, but I actually am really liking where we are right now. The knife has been through the acid bath and the coffee bath. In fact, we've gone back and forth a couple of times, and I'm gonna see what happens if I now try to polish the silvery parts of the blade. I've never done this before with the cloth and the acid etched Damascus. I'm not sure how much polishing it's supposed to take. But I guess as long as I'm seeing it improve, I should just keep going. All right, I think I still had a little bit too much of the oxide buildup on what's supposed to be the silvery parts. So instead of just using the jewelry polishing cloth, I grabbed a piece of 7000 grit sandpaper and I had it wrapped around this little bar, which let me do a very focused but very straight abrasive on the top, so it shouldn't go down into the recessed areas at all, which is the blacker parts. And as you can see, it really picks up quite a bit of the oxide on the paper, so I have to keep moving it. But it doesn't take much to get one whole side of the blade going, and I think that's a much better silvery effect. Really gets the contrast that we're hoping for more than just using the cloth. Not that using the cloth is the wrong thing, just that because I got too much oxide buildup from its bath in the ferric chloride, I needed something a little bit more aggressive. At this point, I am going to call the blade done, and that's where we're going to end part 1 of the knife build video. Part 2, we're gonna be finishing it up, getting all of the handle done, and just really cleaning this thing up to look perfect, sharpening it, all the good stuff. So 2 parts, this is part 1, and I am so happy with how this has turned out. The pattern that Kyle put into this as he forged it is just absolutely beautiful. His instructions on how to get a nice finish on it worked great, and just tooting my own horn a little bit, I'm very happy with how I was able to grind it. I like the shoulder, I like just the thickness I got, the distal taper that goes all the way down it. I think it's going to be a nice, light, very usable, functional knife, while also just being absolutely beautiful, which is really the goal in knife making, is a beautiful work of art that is also a very functional tool. So loving how this is going. Make sure you subscribe so you'll know when to come back to watch part 2. And thank you so much. This has been really fun. I hope you've enjoyed watching this process. As always, thank you so much to my supporters on Patreon. Your support means the world to me, and if you are interested in joining them, the link for that is down in the description. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.